Dodgers go ahead 3-2. And these Dodgers at last are world champions.
Long time ago, when I was leaving America to come to Eretz Yisrael, I went to take leave of the Rosh Yeshiva under whom I had studied, Rav Hutner, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha. We got into a discussion about language, and he put forth the idea that poetry is only written in mother tongue. You don't find people that wrote great poetry in a second language, no matter how proficient they became in a second language, because it has to do with the magic of discovery of the world. Childhood, everything is being discovered. Later I came to think that it's true also of games. Games you played as a child have a special affinity, a special connection to the core of discovering your own abilities, challenges. Years later, I went to live in Canada as an adult, and students that I was teaching were very into hockey. I couldn't take any interest in it. And to this day, if I'm driving and there's a baseball game on my peripheral vision, I have to stop to make an evaluation of the quality of the performance. And somehow it's embedded in the unconscious based on those earlier experiences. I must admit that I really stopped following baseball when the Dodgers went into Golus in 1957. And Los Angeles is Golus. But the conceptual relationship to baseball, and some bits and pieces here and there, I still, of course, relate to. There's a sefer written by a Rishon, Rabbi Yosef Jikatalia. It's brought by the tour, the Beis Yosef brings him. Wrote a book, a sefer on mashalim, on metaphor. And he uses in his introduction the following idea, which is a metaphor. It's an analogy. He says, there are certain things you can transport physically. The stender, the eyeglass case. You can hold them directly and take them from one place to another. There are other things that have to be put in a vessel, in a utensil, in order to be handled, to be transferred from one place to another. Air, fire. You have to put it in some kind of container. If I want to take this air and move it there, I have to somehow capture it and close it. Fire, not easy to handle. So it needs candle, it needs some kind of wick, it needs something to transport it. There are ideas that are similar to air and fire, and they need the substance of a kli, of a vessel, to transport them. That, in a sense, is what mashal is about, what a parable, an analogy, a metaphor is about. Shlomo Melech writes Sefer Mishlei. Mishlei is full of analogies communicating insights in Torah that need the vehicle of the mashal in order to communicate the idea. In fact, his name, Shlomo, if you rearrange the letters, is HaMashal. And Moshel, a human being, can become sovereign. How does a person come to a level of governing, of being sovereign? Through the use of mashal. We network different ideas and insights in the world and we connect them, and therefore we can have a certain insight into the underpinning, the web that connects it all. Okay, so growing up in Brooklyn in the late 40s and 50s, we played in the local schoolyard. One of the frequent machlekes and differences of opinion was the recording of the games and the scoring, because how do you determine who's the official scorekeeper? So we had choose-up games, and I remember the arguments about whether something was a hit or an error. Some of the players arguing vigorously, he ain't so official to begin with. Who made him official? Who gave him smicha? Mechatesa, right? And others said, but you need a scorekeeper. Why do you need a scorekeeper? Because it has to be recorded for posterity. To which my Brooklyn compatriot's reply was, prosperity can take care of itself. And of course I add, and usually does. So there's posterity and there's prosperity. The two don't always coincide. We had choose-up games, which meant that there was very little loyalty to a particular team because the configuration changed depending on who showed up in the schoolyard to be chosen into the game. But yet it was fascinating that the game was played with passion. There was a certain sense of dedication to winning. Winning was a mitzvah. Winning was an injunction from on high that one had to be loyal to the ethic of the game. One must win. I remember when in 1956 I left New York. I went to Baltimore to learn. In Baltimore, there were less New Yorkers. There were many people from the South and from the West, Midwest, that had come to learn there. And the first Erev Shabbos, we went out to play basketball in the Y. And being a New Yorker, I was positioning myself under the boards and elbowing a bit. And these fellas from the South, very gentlemanly-like, were shocked. And the fellow stops and looks at me and he says to me, "What are you doing?" I looked back at him in astonishment. I said, "What do you think this is, a game?" It's a mitzvah. You have to pay l'shem shamayim. Where's your passion? Before I left New York, the yeshiva where I had learned, became a very non-Jewish community. We were playing punchball. We got attacked by the new residents that had come in. And in the middle of this melee, swinging and ducking, by the way, punchball is baseball midrabanan. If you don't have a bat, and you don't have a glove, and you don't have bases, you play with a rubber ball, and you play with the tzura of a baseball game. There's first base, second base, third base. And in order, as the Ramban Lahavda will say, about mitzvahs in chutzlot, so you shouldn't forget them when you get back to Eretz Yisrael. So when you're stuck in the middle of the street in Brownsville and you don't have access to the schoolyard and the equipment, you play punchball. So we were playing punchball, we got attacked, and there was one fellow I used to learn Musa with frequently. He was very, very fond of saying, Hakol boro lechvoidei. Everything has been created by the Rebbeinu Shalom as an opportunity to index and access connection to the divinity. So in the middle of this fight, swinging and ducking, I turned to him, I said, Mendel, could you tell me, where's the Hakol Boro Lechvoidei here? What are we supposed to learn from this? To which he, without missing a beat, I think he was ducking when he said it, said to me, it's infinitely better to give than to receive. which in fact he was right. In Baltimore, it carried over. In fact, I think that was my introduction to coming into the world of Kirov. We went out to play baseball when the season came. Softball chose up a game. And I see they're choosing 10. We played with 10 men in our school. We played with a short center. Okay, there was a gzeira midrabanan for softball. But 11, 12, 13, 14 guys on a team? I said, what are you guys doing? Nah, it's a chesed. What do you care? Let another guy play. It's a mitzvah. Do a chesed. Batter gets up, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 strikes, and he's still standing there. I said, he's out. Nah, it's a chesed. Let him play. It suddenly hit me. These guys are playing reform baseball. I said, it's a halacha. Let's get out the Shulchan Aruch. We have to get back to basics. Anyway, that was my introduction to Kirov. I felt it was a mission that I was sent there to get these guys to play halachic baseball. Some years ago, I remember, a long time ago really, there was a Jewish player that came up to the Dodgers. They had had one utility player. He was gone. In 1949, Cal Abrams came up. He was the only Jewish player on the Brooklyn Dodgers. Cal Abrams, the first few weeks, was hitting over 350. I was convinced that, totally convinced, I was 12 years old at the time. By the way, the small print in my ksuba says you're not allowed to quote that. My wife says I'm not allowed to divulge how old I am because that might imply how old she is. 1949, Cal Abrams came up, and Cal was hitting over 350 the first few weeks. I was convinced that he's going to be Mashiach. The Dodgers, the right team, the right place. It's Olam Shona v'Nefesh. It's the perfect merging of the right team, the right time, the right place. A Jew hitting 350. But he had a peculiarity. He was a lefty, and he hit to left field. Now, lefties invariably pull the ball, and they hit to right field, right? He hit to left field. So I was the only fellow in the neighborhood in the schoolyard there with a yarmulke, and I got challenged by some of my secular friends and some of my non-Jewish friends. They said, what's with this Jew, the lefty, and he hits to left field? I said, I don't know what your problem is. We read from right to left. In fact, baseball goes counterclockwise from right to left. Baseball transcends time and place. The home run doesn't go into a net, doesn't go into a box, doesn't go into a cage. It can go on forever. Claire, a Lomda Sheshaila, that the home run that went out over Bedford Avenue, if it really reached that point and the wind blew it back onto the field, is it a home run? Is Klutik a hundredomi or not? It's a very, very lomdische Shaila, which we'll leave to explore for another time. I have been in correspondence, or considered being in correspondence, with the Brooklyn Borough Council. They named Bedford Avenue, which was behind the right field fence, Gil Hodges Way. That's because Gil Hodges lived on Bedford Avenue. It's a misnomer. Bill Hodges was a righty. Gil Hodges never hit a home run into Bedford Avenue. Duke Snyder hit home runs. He was a lefty, and he cleared that 40-foot fence. So it's a total misnomer. But you're dealing with Amaratzim, so what can... You have to be tolerant. Talking about Gil Hodges. 1953. The Dodger manager was Charlie Dressen. And the Board of Education got into an extraordinary grammatical debate about a statement that Dressen made. Dressen said midway through the 53 season, the Giants is dead. People were critiquing him and saying, you should say the Giants are dead. The Board of Education came back and said, you don't say the United States are a wonderful country, you say is. It's a collective noun. You're talking about the Dodgers. He's right. So they defended Charlie Dressen. Charlie Dressen, by the way, was a fellow who, when interviewed, said that he never read a book in his life, and he doesn't think it did him any harm. Okay. But he set a benchmark for grammar in Brooklyn. The end of that season ended in a World Series between the Dodgers and the Yankees. Being a Dodger fan in those years was good preparation for being a Jew, because you were convinced you had the best team, you could prove you had the best team, but you never won the World Series. It was good hachon, a good preparation. You're in the 6th game of the World Series, and Carl Furillo is on first base, Gil Hodges is on second base, and Billy Cox is up at bat. Billy was a weak hitter, but occasionally hit the ball. Billy bunts to move them over to second and third to be in scoring position. Now, if you were the catcher, Yogi Berra, and you're running out to pick up the ball, where do you throw the ball? You throw the ball to first base to get the runner, Billy Cox, who's a right-handed hitter, or do you throw to third base to try and get Gil Hodges out? Gil Hodges broke with the pitch before the bunt was highly improbable. For some inexplicable reason, Berra threw to third base. And he got Hodges out, according to the umpire, Al Gore. Art Gore, I think it was Art Gore. Now, there were a lot of discussion, and there were films afterwards that Gore was wrong. But they didn't have then the rabbinic decision that later came that you could review a wrong decision, right? So Maisa Bezdin, the Chalais, was in place, and that remained for eternity. Inerasable injustice. Hodges was called out. So some of the newspaper writers, some of the pundits were analyzing how come Berra threw to third base. I think the best thought I saw was that Berra saw that Gore called him out already, so he might as well throw to third base. Which I think, gentlemen, is how much of the analysis of the games and contests and challenges of our lives we decide. We decide in advance, and then we have the supposed events and actuality fit in to how that works. That shift that they pulled to the left side of the field on Cal Abrams was really invented by a Cleveland managing player, Lou Boudreau, for Ted Williams for a right field shift. He used to pull everybody over to the right because Williams was an extraordinary pull hitter. Williams was critiqued. Williams was told he could have punched a lot of hits to left field because everybody was on the right side of the field. He resisted. He kept swinging for the long ball. He said, I'm likely to hit a home run, or at least out of the reach of the outfielders, and that's more likely to win a game than getting me a meager single. Not only that, he was critiqued that he took too many walks. pitches that were just a bit off home plate. He waited out, he refused to swing. And he explained, once I start swinging at a pitch that's a few millimeters off, I'm going to swing at pitches that are that much off, that much off. That's a gzeira midarabonon, not to come to be over under the Raisa. That's rabbinic legislation protecting you from swinging at the wrong pitch. Legislation in the middle of a season. There was a manager called Bill Veeck. He was a very entrepreneurial guy. He bought the worst team in the history of baseball, the St. Louis Browns, and he was trying to encourage some attendance. And he hired a midget that was about 3 feet tall, had him put on the roster so that legally he could, and he could bat, and he sent him up to bat. Now it is told that this fellow, by the way, his name was Gidel, which you might pronounce Godel. So that was a case with Zeha Godel cotton year. But this fellow Gidel, when he was on his way up to bat, he said to Veeck, if it's a good pitch, I'm going to swing. To which Veeck said, I'm sitting behind home plate with a rifle. If you do, you're dead. Okay, but he got to walk. So they then had to pass legislation in the major leagues that would restrict which players and at what point in the season they had to be put on, and that it had to be something that wasn't being put there just for a ruse. Veeck is also the guy, later when he bought the Cleveland Indians, he had movable fences in the outfield. Now, depending on which team was coming in, did they have more right-handed pull hitters or left-handed pull hitters in relation to his hitting? So he would move the fence in, let's say, for Detroit, and then push it out again for Boston. So there was nothing in the rule books to prevent that. Until they had to create legislation, the Bezdin of the major leagues had to sit, and they were chayka v'derish, and they decided that the fence had to be put up there at the beginning of the season and couldn't be tampered with. Most famous Jewish player of our times, Sandy Koufax, and his Yom Kippur, 1963, his Yom Kippur non-participation made a real Kiddush Hashem. Fellow who pitched that day was Don Drysdale. Don Drysdale, it was a World Series game, Don Drysdale got killed by the Yankees. So there are two versions of what happened. One version, which I like better, is that I heard from somebody who heard it from a baseball player on the Mets, Cranepool, said that when Walt Alston came out to the mound, Alston said to Drysdale, why couldn't you be Jewish? There's a woman journalist that wrote a book, and she claims that Drysdale said it to Alston, I bet you're feeling melancholy that I wasn't Jewish. Okay, I think it works better the other way. But the contest, the challenge, baseball is the only game that starts with defense. It's also the only game where the opponent's thrust can be used for your advantage. It's like Jiu-Jitsu. The faster the fastball is thrown, if you connect, you have more likelihood of hitting a home run. That's anti-Semitism. The pitcher who gave up, at least the last time I looked, the most home runs in Major League history was Robin Roberts. Gave up 500 home runs. He also won 6 straight years of 20 games. 1950, through and including 55. So the fastball, anti-Semitism can either do you in, chas v'shalom, or you connect with it, and you understand the irrationality of it, and the faster it comes at you, the harder it comes at you, the further you can hit it. You can use it to your advantage. You're more likely to hit for the long ball. We live in a generation where a lot of so-called compromises have been made supposedly to improve the situation. 1926 World Series was the sixth game, the greatest pitcher, according to some, baseball history, at least of that era, was Grover Cleveland Alexander. They made a movie of this game that I'm referring to now. And interestingly enough, the man who played Alexander was Ronald Reagan, which means that being an actor can be either a prelude to becoming president of the United States, or it doesn't have to be a prelude. We see that you can also just continue being an actor. Works either way. Babe Ruth gets walked. Okay, 1926 World Series, Babe Ruth is on first base. Babe Ruth was a great hitter. He was a very good pitcher before they decided it was worth more money to have him be able to bat every day. He was not a fast base runner. The batter that's up is Bob Musial. He was a right-handed hitter and 26 on the Yankees. He had led the season in home runs the year before. 2 out. If he hits a home run, Musial, it's the winning run. They're 1 run behind. Babe Ruth tries to steal second base. And he's thrown out by about 1.5 miles. That ends the series. And they ask him, "What'd you do?" He said, "Well, I was sitting around there just doing nothing. I figured I might as well do something." Gentlemen, doing nothing is sometimes better than doing something if the something is counterproductive. You have to carefully calculate. In these stickball and punchball games in the street, frequently we didn't have designated bases. So the car parked on the right side of the street, the hubcap was first base. The car parked on the left side of the street was third base. And second base was the sewer at the peak of the triangle in between. Middle of the game, somebody decides to pull away his car. The third base car suddenly gets pulled away, so left without a third base. So the consensus was there was a Mr. Goldberg who was sitting in front of his house, tenement, with a fold-up chair, watching the game. They asked him, could he please move to the street and he would be third base. Very sweet fellow. And he agreed that he would be third base. Middle of the game, the ball is out in the outfield, and the runners are going around the bases, fellows coming around second. So the outfielder throws the ball to third base. And Mr. Goldberg catches the ball and tags out the runner. It's the only case in history where you have a perfect merging of gavre and hefza. The person and the object came together in a most exquisite fusion. Picasso had his blue period, he had a green period. I had periods where I preferred to play center field. Center field, you have a very panoramic view of the whole game and everything that's happening at all times. You don't have to turn around. It's all there. Then there were times where I wanted to be more at the heart of the action, so I switched to shortstop. And then I upgraded one level more, which was to pitch. I remember there was a pitcher named Sal Magley that pitched for the Giants. His forte was an extraordinary curveball. But in order to set up the curveball, you had to dust off the hitters. Today they're more stringent about it, but in those years, they used to frequently hit the hitter, or at least brush him off to move him away from home plate. Then when the curveball would be coming at him, he would put his foot, left foot, in the bucket, and then as the ball breaks over the far corner, he swings and he misses. He was called Sal the Barber for shaving the hitters with consistency. Now I remember when he was pitching for the Giants, how morally outraged I was. It's indecent. You can kill somebody. People were killed by being hit by baseballs. It was before they wore helmets. It's immoral. Okay. Time went on, and eventually Magley wound up pitching for the Dodgers. I said, wow, now we're going to have all the advantage of all that brilliant strategy and those tactics of brushing off the players. Wait a minute. What changed? What changed is he's playing for my team now. He's playing for my team, then I see it differently. In fact, there was always an issue, judgments, judgment call. In the choose-up games, there was one fella that held himself to be a great pitcher, but nobody else did. They thought he was born to be a right fielder. He would be sent out to right field, and then when a ball would be hit to right field in the middle of the game, runners are moving around the bases, and he had to get the ball back to the infield. He would wind up, throw curveballs, knuckleballs back. I said, what are you, crazy? You're on my team. I said, no. Hält sich for a pitcher. He holds himself that he's a pitcher. He just happens to be misplaced at this moment in right field. Some people say the greatest catch, but at least the most picturesque catch in baseball history was Willie Mays' catch of Vic Werth's drive out to center field in the Polo Grounds. Polo Grounds was about, center field fence was about 1.5 miles from home plate. Willie, running backwards, caught it over his shoulder. But the real lamdonim, the real mevinim know the brilliance of the play was how fast he got the ball back to the infield. Nobody tagged up. And they asked him afterwards, how did you do that? So he said, he was a Talmud Muvik of Leo DeRocha, and Leo said, he quoted, Willie said, Willie always told me, the ball don't do no one no good out there. I have, by the way, told this to many of our potential donors. I said, you guys accumulated a lot of wealth, but you're in the outfield. We're in the infield. The ball don't do no one no good out there. You got to get it back to the infield. It was Tommy Henrik, Beferisha Tommy Henrik. He used to say, catching a fly ball is a pleasure. He was Old Reliable, he was called, in the Yankees in the 40s. Only got hits, a lot of hits in the clutch. So he used to say, catching a fly ball is a pleasure. Knowing what to do with it is business. That's already translating it into tachlis and moving the game forward. Every one of us is endowed with certain talents, certain abilities. We never know when we're going to be challenged. And there's a moment Yesh kaina ilomo b'shah achas, you can be kaina one shot. But the real key is consistency. Consistency. Stephen Jay Gould, the paleontologist at Harvard, quoted over 25 years ago, quoted a computer person, Purcell, who predicted that every baseball record would be broken except Joe DiMaggio's 56 straight games. Because consistency like that happens only once in 1,000 years. And in fact, that record has not been broken. It doesn't seem likely to get broken. By the way, he was out and then he hit in 17 straight games again. But the record is 56 straight games. But there are moments of greatness that you see the intervention of Hashgocha. 1947 World Series, there was a utility player put in left field, Al Gianfrido. He made one of the most beautiful, greatest catches in Yankee Stadium, robbing Joe DiMaggio of a home run. Nobody heard of Gianfrido before that. Nobody heard of him afterwards. He was just there. I call it the Gianfrido phenomenon. There's somebody that Hashgocha just put in the right place for that moment, and then it's as if he didn't exist and doesn't exist afterwards. Disappears. There was another catch which was crucial in the Dodgers winning the World Series, which Yogi Berra sliced the ball down the left field line. He was a left-handed pull hitter. Everybody was swung over to the right. One of the fastest men in baseball then was a Cuban left fielder who had just come up, Sandy Amorós, ran from left center all the way to the line, outstretched arm, magnificent catch. He again wasn't heard of afterwards. So sometimes Hashgocha just puts a Gianfrido and an Amorós in the right place for the right moment, but our vision has to be, how do we translate it into consistency over an extended period of time? Some of you may have noticed in my office a painting of Ebbets Field. If you haven't been there, you're welcome to come see. That came about in the following manner. It looks like a photograph. It's so meticulously executed. The fellow who gave that to me commissioned an artist to do a wall-size mural in his office in Manhattan. And he gave me a bchina, he tested me on knowing the players, and since I passed so well, he sent me a lithograph of the painting. Now, Bobby Thompson's home run, a book was written about that, The Shot Heard Around the World. Because I had been interviewed by Thomas Friedman from the New York Times in his book From Beirut to Jerusalem, and he asked me about the Cal Abrams picture that was hanging that was in my office, still is there. And that came about because I came into an office in Manhattan and got to talking. The fellow had seats that had been auctioned off from Ebbets Field when it was torn down. And we got to talking about the Dodgers, and I mentioned Cal Abrams and how I thought he might be Mashiach. Anyway, he knew Cal Abrams. He called him, got him on the phone, and Cal was very touched that somebody remembered him. And he sent me this picture. This picture was sitting on the shelf in my room when Tom Friedman came to interview me. How did Tom Friedman come to interview me? I had gotten a call from one of my mentors, Naftali Newberger, Zechet Tzaddik Levracha, who was the president of the Baltimore Yeshiva, and he told me that New York Times, Friedman in particular, writing very nasty stuff about Israel and particularly about the Haredi community. You have to go try and see him. See if you can win him over a bit. Okay. I tried. Anyway, a month later, Rabbi Newberger calls me. He said, "No, you saw him?" I said, "I called and he didn't return my call." To which Rabbi Newberger said to me, "Reb Nota, if you thought you could get $10,000 from him for Ohr Somayach, you would have seen him already. Okay, I got to see him within the next 10 days. Developed a bit of a friendship. Unfortunately, it was the end of his sojourn. He was on his way back to the States. But when he came to Ohr Somayach, he wanted to know what the picture of Cal Abrams. So I mentioned a little bit of the background, but then I told him, you know what? It's a perfect analogy, because he asked me what's my attitude towards the secular Zionist state. I told him it's very much like Cal Abrams. When Cal came up to the Dodgers, I was already a Dodger fan before he came up. I wanted him to make it. I prayed for him to make it. But when he bottomed out and was subsequently traded to Cincinnati, I didn't stop being a Dodger fan. I'm a fan of the Jewish people. We existed throughout history hoping and praying that we would get back to Eretz Yisrael. I don't think this secular state is the final stop, but I'm hoping and praying that we're going to make it. And I'm doing everything I can and staking my life and my family's life on making it. We're hoping for the best and doing everything we can to work from within the system to make it work. He kind of wrote this up. The deal I had with him is that I see the text of what he's printing before it gets printed, and there was one very subtle change. What I agreed upon, because that's what I had said, and that's what he said, and that's what he wrote. But then the editor, or he changed it. It could be the editor. You know the definition of an editor. There's somebody who is asked to separate the wheat from the chaff and print the chaff. Okay. The difference was that at the end of the interview, he had written, sitting across from Rabbi Schiller, I had the feeling I was sitting across from someone who had the wind behind his sails. That was what he showed me, which I was fine with. Later, when it got printed in the book, From Beirut to Jerusalem, it read, sitting in front of Rabbi Schiller, I had the feeling I was sitting in front of someone who felt he had the wind behind his sails. That's all the difference in the world. Any event, okay, I registered the protest, but so what? Some years later, a fellow is writing a book in the New York Times, a guy named Prager, The Shot Heard Around the World, and he's writing about Bobby Thompson, home run. He asked me, what were you doing that day? Okay. Honor bound to tell the truth, right? Even though I wasn't a Boy Scout, but midvar sheka tirchak, I told him I was fasting. It was a playoff game, decisive playoff game, Dodgers and Giants. When Bobby Thompson hit that home run, I was fasting. Why? I said, not only that, but I fasted the anniversary of that home run every year since. According to the Hebrew date, it was Tzom Gedalia. Cal Abrams once visited, and I'll end with these two stories. Cal Abrams once visited Eretz Yisrael. I didn't know it was him. The following is what happened. It was just at the time that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Zecher Tzaddik Levracha, was being feted at that time that he was going to appear in Yad Eliyahu and reveal himself as Mashiach. And there were billboards going up and down the highways, and there was a lot of hype going on in the community about it. It was just during those days. I get a phone call, and the secretary says, somebody wants to speak to you. He doesn't want to identify himself, because a lot of time, there are a lot of rabbis, Baruch Hashem and Ohr Somayach, doesn't really want me. No, he wants to speak to you. I get on the phone, I say, who's speaking, please? He said, Mashiach. Mashiach? So I said, which Mashiach? He says to me, guess. had siyata d'shmaya. I said, Cal Abrams. Because I had said I thought he was going to be Mashiach, and that's what Tom Friedman printed in From Beirut to Jerusalem. It was Cal Abrams. He came down to Ohr Somayach for a visit, and I have a ball signed by Cal Abrams in the office. It was my ball, right? But he signed it when he was there. Cal told me the following story. When he was doing well, during that streak, there were 9 consecutive games. There was one particular boy that was waiting for his autograph. So after the 9th autograph, he said to this boy, I'm very touched, I'm very moved, I'm very complimented, but tell me, why do you need 9 of my autographs? So the boy looked up at him shamefacedly and said to me, I'll tell you the truth, Mr. Abrams. My friend Louis said if I give him 9 of yours, I can get 1 Carl Furillo. Bobby Thompson's home run, and this is the end. Bobby Thompson's home run in the Polo Grounds hugged the left field line. It was 273 feet. Would not have been a home run in Ebbets Field. Ebbets Field was 348 feet on the left field line. Polo Grounds went out at a very strange angle to center field, almost a perpendicular, that it was a mile from home plate, as I said, but that's center field. But the lines were very short. But Ebbets Field was 348. Bobby Thompson's home run likely would have been caught in Ebbets Field. 348 in Ebbets Field. 348 in Gematria is Sameach. Wait, we're only halfway there. The right field fence was 297 feet from home plate. There was a 40-foot fence that had to be cleared. Remember, Duke Snyder hit the home runs there, not Gil Hodges. 40-foot fence that had to be cleared. So it meant you probably needed another 40 feet in order to clear that fence before the ball would land. But on the line, 297 feet, which means from first base to the right field fence. How many feet? 207. Infields are always the same dimensions. Outfields vary according to communities. Infields are like halacha. That's non-negotiable. Outfields are minhagim. There are different communities, different kehilas. Polo Grounds was one kehila. The Ebbets Field was another kehila. That's midrabanan. You have a lot of latitude in structuring outfields, not infields. Okay, so that means from first base to the right field fence was 207 feet, which is Or in Gematria, Ohr Somayach. Now, the budding lamdonim here in the crowd are thinking, yeah, but what about from home plate to first base? Ohr Somayach says you have to get to first base on your own. Then we'll knock you home. And remember, baseball is the only game where in order to score, you have to come home. Chodesh Tov.